Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be taking a look at another response to my A Few Questions for Ancaps video that I put out a couple of days ago. This response comes to us from a YouTuber named Snizzypoo. Snizzypoo. It's just a really fun name to say. Anyway, I digress. Sir Snizzypoo has made a pretty good video bringing up some pretty good points and stuff, so today we will be responding in kind. Hopefully this can be another interesting video delving into the concept of anarcho-capitalism and brings up a few more interesting points that we can discuss along the way. So without further ado, let's just get right into this thing.
Today I saw an interesting video from the YouTuber The Captain's Stuffin' Things. The Captain, or I hope that's what he wants to be called, has a few questions for Ancaps. Now, I consider myself pretty darn close to being an anarcho-capitalist, so I'd figured I'd jump on this bandwagon and answer these questions, and hopefully we can get some views out of this. I need some views. I also thought that this was a pretty good video. The Captain Stuffin' Things has a pretty good YouTube channel here. The questions happen to be some of the hardest questions Ancaps could ever try to answer because of the nature of the questions themselves, which we will get to. But overall, I'd like to thank the Captain for being respectful, and I will reciprocate in kind with maybe a little jab here and there. So without further ado, let's do this.
Alrighty, well first thing, yeah, you can call me Captain or the Captain. Captain's actually my first name, my real actual name, so it's pretty appropriate. Now before we go any further, for the purpose of this video, I will again be cutting out most of my responses from the original video, just to help cut back on time and to make things less confusing. If you want to see the originals, link will be down below in the description as always. So for this next little bit, a small point of contention right here off the bat, I make a statement that although communism doesn't actually work in practice, it looks good on paper.
Okay, so first of all, communism does not look good on paper. As we all know, resources are limited, and everyone's time preference is different. Communists can't account for things like economizing scarce resources, aggregating time preferences of populations, or even knowing when a plan has failed until it's too late. And all of this can be realized just by reading what they write. The other thing we need to take into account here is Ancapistan does not get implemented, as this would imply central planning, which can only come from a form of governance with monopolistic privileges in the production of property protections, i.e. the state. So, no, Captain, no. And this brings us to our next problem.
Well, when I said communism looks good on paper, I meant that everything and everyone has to be perfect and ideal for it to function. I mean, it clearly falls apart if you try to implement it in any form of actual reality, though, because we do not live in a fantasy Marxist utopia. Now, for your second point, that Ancapistan doesn't get implemented is a good and fair point to bring up. I just ask how does it get implemented because I assume, maybe falsely so, and maybe I've gotten the wrong impression, but Ancaps seem to want to push for this to happen. They want to make it a reality. Like Mr. Dapperton said in his response, it would get implemented in a place like the USA or similar country by getting enough people to opt out of government. Like it or not, this way of thinking would suggest some kind of organized effort and push to make it happen, although I don't want to assume that you think that this is how it should go. I mean, in my last video, I did state that, it's perfectly reasonable, it's a good strategy to just wait for said country to collapse and just let Ancapistan, form naturally, just let the Ancaps stand up and let Ancapistan take its place. See, now I'm just curious, is there some type of contention in the Ancap community as to how Ancapistan should come about? McNukes! I gotta say, I love the little robot, I really do.
The entirety of this video is the Captain putting Ancapistan in the most impossible and dire situations imaginable. And I really do mean impossible. You have to understand that the question you just asked has absolutely nothing to do with anarcho-capitalist theory at all. What kind of situation are we talking about here? Was Ancapistan America yesterday with its government and everything, and then now today it's Ancapistan? So like the rest of the world saw the United States go from being what it is to Ancapistan like overnight. I mean, you're looking at a possible world-ending event.
Well, of course I put Ancapistan in the worst situation possible. Impossible though you may find it. I mean, the CDC has a bit about zombie preparedness on its website. It may seem like an impossible joke, but like, what if zombies though? Like I said, it may sound a bit silly, but I think it's a fun and interesting conversation. Hell, I think we could have an awesome conversation, have a good discussion on what if the zombie apocalypse happened? How would certain governments react to it, maybe which one might come out on top? But anyway, yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable to discuss a potentially world-ending event. I mean, we do have bunkers in the United States for our VIPs and missile defense programs for a reason. I mean, shit might just hit the fan, you never know. And honestly, I think under the right circumstances, the US government could fall in a single day. Granted, things would have to be in shambles before the actual death rattle of the country. But look, I'm not trying any gotchas asking these questions. I know some of my questions are extreme, but I wanted some of them to be. How does Ancapistan fare under the worst conditions that can be thrown at it? How does it stack up against other countries in dealing with those situations? I think more of these extreme questions that I ask might reveal how a nation that doesn't have any governing system comes together and responds in the face of adversity.
I'm sorry to laugh, but I just don't think you understand the absolute impossible situation you just put Ancapistan into, and you're not going to get very good responses to this because it's just so absurd. What if I asked you, how does your minarchist society deal with everyone in your society growing extra appendages at the rate of like 12 appendages per second? Bam. Checkmate, statist.
Don't you think for a second that I'm not crazy enough to take on this argument, sir? Clearly we would have to mandate mandatory limb removal and disposal services. We would have to fund rat breeding programs to help dispose of the extra limbs, or science develops a solution involving spacesuits or something. Then there's the ethical debate on feeding excess limbs and these now extra plump rats to the homeless to help fight hunger. In a world of excess limb growth, is it wrong to eat the limbs of others? What about your own limbs? Will that just be too weird?
But you've asked me to humor you, and I'm going to do my best here. So, what would Ancapistan do? Well, I'm sorry to say it, but Ancapistan wouldn't have nukes. If it were just magic somehow, and the United States was Ancapistan with all of the ANCAP institutions and everything in place, the nukes would be gone. They wouldn't even be here. And the reason why is because there's just no money in nukes. It's not needed for defense, and you can't sell nukes. You start to build nuclear weapons, and it's not like people aren't going to find out. There's going to be satellites and all kinds of other nations prying and looking in and seeing what's going on. They're going to know if we're making nukes. Something like that would start a war, and the cost of that war would vastly outweigh the benefits from, a McNuke factory. So, I'm sorry, it's probably not the answer that you wanted, but you gotta ask the right questions, man.
Okay, well, let me present you with this instead. Let's say that I live in Ancapistan and I own my own company, producing weapons and ammo, armored vehicles and the such, but I also provide a specialized service. If someone is willing to pay me enough, I will build them their own personal McNuke. Now, this is done by commission, so it's still a profitable venture at the individual price that I've quoted to some rich citizen of Ancapistan. I feel like this may be a bit more realistic of a scenario, so can I do this in Ancapistan? If I'm the rich citizen, can't I just commission someone to build me my own McNuke? I mean, if I don't have an assembly line of nukes, is it still possible to do this in Ancapistan? I mean, I don't know exactly how the whole process of building a nuclear missile works, but I feel like I could go under the radar of building a single nuke for somebody for the right price. And again, if I am the rich citizen in this scenario, am I allowed to own and house my own nuke?
Okay, so this question is a little more reasonable. However, it's still based on a few assumptions, and so let me explain how this would work. In Ancapistan, they would most likely use a polycentric legal system in which there isn't law enforcement, but property protection. Unlike a statist society that uses a state for the protection of property, Ancapistan doesn't have a monopoly on this service that has a one-size-fits-all type of institution. Because, as it turns out, in regards to property protection, different people have different needs. You have some people with more property than others that needs to be protected. You have some people with properties that span out across large sections. You have people with multiple properties and multiple different areas in the country. And you have people in completely different socioeconomic situations. You would most likely see a scenario where you and your neighbor have different property protection agencies. The coverage of protection would look kind of like the cell phone coverage maps that you see from, Verizon or AT&T and such. So what if a large country like Russia decided they wanted to pay one of these companies to subvert Ancapistani interests? Well, like you brought up, customers would drop their coverage and pick up coverage from one of their competitors, which would pick up defensive positions to fight the usurper. But ultimately, this comes down to economics. I mean, you kind of made it easy for me here, picking America and all. It already does have the largest economy in the world, and no doubt it would be much larger if it were Ancapistan. This rogue company would find itself surrounded by other property protection companies, which would cut off supply lines and take that company out. I mean, they would have vastly superior resources, and they would vastly outnumber the rogue company. I think that the presumption here is that Ancapistan would have very large property enforcement companies, and that, maybe China or Russia or somebody would pay them to attack Ancapistan, and like, I don't know, like a quarter of the country would be under attack, but you're making a presumption that there really is no evidence for. We would most likely see a very decentralized type of system. And that's one thing that gives Ancapistan such great stability, is there is no central focal point of attack. It's very decentralized, which would make this plan nigh impossible to accomplish. Now, I'm not saying Ancapistan would be impervious, but I think that this would not be a very good strategy. I just don't see anybody trying to employ this strategy to attack Ancapistan.
Pretty good point. I think when you phrase these forces as property enforcement agencies as opposed to, just mercenaries you've hired, it helps to iron out some of the wrinkles I proposed. And like you said, it makes the counter-argument of the thought fairly easy when you propose Ancapistan in a place like America. Although I feel like we can concede in this scenario that the strategy would be perfectly viable, and you could probably implement it in a smaller setting with less economic power backing Ancapistan. I think a smaller Ancapistan would have a more perilous time figuring out what to do when a large nation could simply pay off all of the defense agencies, or at least enough of them to get the other ones to back down. Realistically, though, the international community would probably step in during such an event, so I do thank you for humoring me with these questions.
So we can't have help from anybody else? Oh, it's more possible. Shit just wouldn't happen. Oh, okay. Let's say that you're France, and the United States attacks you, and nobody comes to your aid. Well, looks like you're fucked, France. Checkmate status. The question is, why wouldn't they help? The country of Ancapistan would be the new Swiss bank account. It would be the new Panama. It would be where Queen Elizabeth, Maduro, and Vladimir Putin did their banking. You don't attack Switzerland for a reason. I think a better question would be, what does Ancapistan do for national defense? How does it get around the public good problem? And well, my answer for that would be insurance companies. So let's play this out. You've got large businesses in Ancapistan, and these businesses are going to want to take out insurance policies to mitigate the risk of attack from foreign nations. And because stopping an attack that would destroy very large and expensive buildings would be cheaper than actually rebuilding them, insurance companies would offer these types of plans. They would also partner with companies that specialize in keeping shipping lanes free of pirates and other belligerents. They would partner with air travel security. There would necessarily be military equipment in Ancapistan. However, it wouldn't be like in America. There wouldn't be as much That is for sure, because defense is much cheaper than offense. There's another presumption here. Just because property protection agencies are decentralized, that doesn't therefore mean that they can't communicate and organize. You see, the question, what happens if we're attacked, will come up. There will be a demand, and companies will fill that demand. Now, all these things combined with the fact that everyone in Ancapistan would be armed, everyone who wishes to be, which in America would be almost everyone, you can see that this is a hell of a deterrent from anybody wanting to attack Ancapistan. The question then turns to, well, would this deterrent be sufficient? And in all fairness, I don't know. I find it kind of odd that you put Ancapistan in America, which has a history of taking down world superpowers with ragtag armies. Not to mention, the United States is now Ancapistan, so the largest military force in the world is now gone. So now you would be dealing with, Russia? I think California has a bigger GDP than Russia. And I'm sorry, I just don't feel very threatened by that.
Well, although Ancapistan would surely have help from the international community, I don't think it would have as much as you think. Or at the very least, this possibility exists. See, most countries are active in the international community. They have a voice and say because they have figureheads that they can send to negotiations, talks, and trade deals. Ancapistan, however, would be like a body without a head on the international scale. You can't have any representatives to interact with the rest of the world on your behalf. Ancapistan won't be able to form formal alliances with anyone. And you do kind of have to assume that Ancapistan is successful enough and people have gained enough faith in its stability to house their assets there like they would a Swiss bank. I personally think it would take some time before that happened, and until it does, your short supply of allies might be a problem if a defensive situation were to arise. Insurance companies are a pretty good solution. I suspect insurance companies will make out like bandits in Ancapistan. Although, with no offensive capabilities, you might run into problems with prolonged terrorist attacks on certain companies or areas. It may not be economically viable for companies to insure certain places, communities, or people that are under attack. At the very least, some of these places or people may not be able to afford the increased, rates that they're going to have to charge to protect these places. And what recourse are those who can't afford the insurance or can't get insured left with? Also, a good portion of the reason why I used America as a starting place for Ancapistan, aside from just being more familiar with it, is that it provides the most charitable foundation for Ancapistan.
I'm an NAP guy. Not all Ancaps believe that the NAP is as useful as others. There are anarcho-capitalists who believe that, on consequence, anarcho-capitalism would be superior to the status systems, and they don't really care about the deontological arguments that the more of the natural rights, Rothbardian-style Ancaps argue for. However, my personal favorite plan that's been proposed by Hans Hoppe is a bottom-up type of strategy that starts with decentralization. And you'll have to note that there are institutions working on this right now. Take a look at the 10th Amendment Center. Take a look at the Mises Institute. We've been pushing things for states' rights and nullification. Right now you have part of California wanting to secede from the other part. That is to say that these ideas we've been pushing for a very long time have had an effect on the public consciousness and are spreading around the country. In my last video, I explained how the federal government can't possibly enforce all of its laws. It needs the states to acquiesce and spend their own funds in helping enforce the federal laws in the books. And states can say no. They can just say, we're not going to do this. And in fact, cities within the states can do that as well. So the idea is to get involved in local government. We could pass laws that prevent tax recipients from voting, such as welfare recipients, judges, police officers. The argument goes, well, these people receive all of their funding from taxpayers. Therefore, they don't have a right to vote on the amount of tax monies that they receive. States can pass laws that are in opposition to federal law, which would put the odious of enforcement on the federal government itself. Following these strategies to their logical conclusion, and given enough time, you will see the United States become de facto anarcho-capitalism. Now, this wouldn't be the dream world utopia anarcho-capitalism that some people subscribe to. However, this would entail the destruction of the monopoly that the federal government has on the use of force within its geographical area. Now, it's one thing for some nut jobs in Waco to defy the federal government and be put down, and quite another thing for whole communities of respectable people to defy federal law. This would place the federal government in quite a pickle, where it would have to use force to legitimize its monopoly of force, which to many Americans would make the federal government illegitimate. Now, I'm not sure how far this strategy can take us, but I do know that we have made inroads. There is progress being made. The way I describe it is, I've got an Ancap train. It's going to take us all the way to anarcho-capitalism. And along the way, if you want to get off, that's fine. But as long as we're moving in that direction, that's a good thing.
See, this is one of the reasons I think I can get along and agree with a lot of what Ancaps advocate for. I personally think we need to cut our government down in size and put more power in the hands of individual states here in America. And, like I said before, I think it would be really fascinating to have one of our states here in America implement anarcho-capitalism. Now, I'm sure there's tons of you out there who think, oh my god, don't do that, but I think this would help anyone interested in either side of the debate. Either build a better case for or against anarcho-capitalism, and we would finally have good examples we would point to help draw conclusions from. Regardless of whether it was a success or a failure, I think a lot of invaluable information for the betterment of society could be gathered from doing this. I think there's a lot to be gained from cutting back the ever-growing branches of government here in the United States, and most other Western countries, and I think most people would be able to see the apparent benefits of doing this, although I think the drawbacks of cutting too much of it away would also become apparent as well. I mean, I could always be wrong, and I would be more than willing to change my mind. But until we are able to implement some of these ideas and see how they play out in practice, we'll just have to explore the possibilities and probabilities as they come up. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I've got for you today. I'd like to say thank you to Snizzypoo for taking the time to make your response. Now, if you've got the time and you're interested, I would suggest heading over to his channel and checking him out. I mean, even if you disagree with everything he says, the little robot is pretty damn entertaining to watch. A link to his channel and his response will be in the description down below. Ew! Speaking of links down below, I have added a link to my BitChute. I'll be uploading some of my older videos over there periodically until it's caught up with my current content, and I'll hopefully be doing dual uploads in the future. Also, patrons might maybe be getting access to a special video in the near future, assuming I can find all the audio clips wherever I've got them. I've got some sort of bloopers that I'm going to mash up together with me just flubbing my lines in various videos that I've randomly gathered. It's not always easy to sit down in front of a screen and just talk to yourself. I end up having to do quite a few takes sometimes. Anyway, that should be a fun little project if I can find all the parts and bits and pieces for it. Now, speaking of patrons, thank you guys once again for helping support this channel. A thank you, of course, goes out to all of my subscribers who help keep this thing afloat. And speaking of afloat, I'm going to go ahead and sail my ass right out of here. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, remember, keep fighting stupidity wherever you may find it. Have a good one. Aw, come on, just do it. You know you want to, just do it.
Snizzypoo.
Ah, see, I told you it was fun to say.
I don't know. I think you're just a weirdo.
Oh, come on, I'm not that weird.
Yeah, okay. Try telling that to anyone who listens in when you're recording these videos.
You know, now that I think about it, I probably do sound like a crazy person with split personalities.
Not gonna lie, it's pretty funny.
Oh well, life's too short to worry about if everyone thinks you're a madman or not. Besides, I think you have to be at least a little bit crazy if you really want to enjoy life.
So true, so true.